1862, Lyon. Beneath the Croix-Rousse hill, workers digging a cistern broke through a brick wall into a dark passage. When they followed it with lanterns, they found not one tunnel but 32, each identical, each ending in another brick wall. They sealed it, and they never explained why. The hill above is now the heart of Lyon's silk-weaving district. Apartment blocks, cobbled courtyards, and the famous traboules, hidden passageways that once let silk workers move raw materials without stepping into the rain. But those are above ground. What sits directly below is something else entirely. The official story, such as it is, says these tunnels were part of a water drainage system built in the early 19th century. Then the record stops. No blueprints. No construction permits. No mention of who ordered 32 parallel tunnels, each precisely 10 meters long, each capped at the far end with a wall of the same pale limestone brick. And that's where the story changes. To understand why this matters, you have to understand the hill itself. Croix-Rousse is a ridge of Jurassic limestone, hard enough to hold tunnels for centuries without collapse. The Romans cut through it for the aqueduct of the Guy, a marvel of engineering that still flows in fragments under the city. That aqueduct ran for 86 kilometers from Montpellier to Lyon, and its stone channels are still visible in some basements today. Roman engineers knew how to follow a gradient. Their aqueduct drops only 17 meters over its entire length, a slope of just 2 centimeters per 100 meters. But that aqueduct runs north to south, following the valley. The Fishbones run east to west. They ignore every natural watercourse. Water, when it falls on the hill, seeps downward along fractures in the rock. It never travels horizontally in long, straight, parallel channels. A drainage system built for function would follow the slope, not cut across it. The Fishbones do the opposite. A geologist from the University of Lyon who examined the site in 1990 noted that the tunnels cut directly through several natural water-bearing fissures, yet there are no signs of erosion or mineral deposits inside. If these were drains, they would have carried at least some water over the years. They did not. The fissures themselves show no channeling, the water simply seeped past the tunnels as if they weren't there. That is geologically impossible unless the tunnels were lined with an impermeable material. They are not. The brickwork is standard lime mortar, porous by design. Here's what they didn't tell you. The tunnels are not random. They run east to west, parallel to the slope of the hill, spaced exactly 4 meters apart. Surveyors who mapped the network in 1987 found that the alignment matches nothing above ground, not the street grid, not the property lines, not the old Roman aqueduct that still runs under the city. The spacing is too regular for drainage. Water doesn't need straight lines to the millimeter. The survey was led by geographer Pierre Gaudet, who had spent a decade mapping Lyon's underground spaces. He later wrote that the precision of the layout made him think of a library or an archive, something organized for human access, not fluid flow. The team used a theodolite and steel tapes, measuring each tunnel twice. They found that the deviation from perfect parallel was less than 3 centimeters over the entire 320 meters. That kind of accuracy in the early 1800s would have required a professional surveyor and a dedicated building plan. No such plan exists. Gaudet also compared the tunnel layout to known military fortifications from the same period. The closest parallel he could find was not a drainage system but the underground magazines of the Maginot Line, built a full century later. Someone in early 19th century Lyon designed a space with a precision that would not be standardized until the industrial age. Gaudet's maps, now held in the municipal library's restricted section, show that the tunnel axes align with the setting sun on the summer solstice. That orientation is celestial, not hydrological. A drain has no use for the solstice. Look closer at the architecture. Each tunnel is barrel-vaulted, just over 2 meters tall and 1.8 meters wide. That's not a culvert. That's a passage built for a person. The floor is flat limestone, worn smoother near the bricked ends than at the entrances. That wear pattern means people walked all the way to those walls repeatedly. If the tunnels were sealed when built, there would be no wear at the far ends. But there is. So the walls went up after years of use. The official record stops here. Consider the specific wear marks. A drainage channel would show uniform abrasion from sediment and water, a smoothing of the entire floor surface. What the surveyors found instead was polish concentrated in 2 narrow bands, each about 40 centimeters apart, the width of a human stride. The limestone has been worn down by as much as 2 centimeters in those bands, while the center of the floor remains rougher. That pattern is not from flowing water. It is from the repeated passage of feet, thousands of trips, likely over decades. And the wear is heavier at the bricked ends than at the open ends. That tells you something else. The traffic was not just passing through. People were stopping at the walls, turning around, and walking back the same way. Why would anyone walk to a blank wall again and again unless something was there at some point? The wear depth suggests at least 20 years of continuous use, perhaps more. That pushes the original construction date well into the 1790s or early 1800s, not the 1820s as the drainage theory would require. A tribalogist from INSA Lyon examined photographs of the wear in 2005 and noted that the polish has a directional grain, slightly deeper on the eastbound side of each band. That means people were walking primarily from west to east, toward the hill's center, and then returning. The asymmetry implies a destination at the eastern end of each tunnel, but the eastern ends are the brick walls, so the destination was behind them. The dates don't match. City drainage records from 1812 describe a simple network of stone channels under the Croix-Rousse, nothing like 32 parallel vaults. In 1831, during the Canut revolts, silk workers used the above-ground traboules as barricades. No document mentions underground refuges or supply routes. Yet when the cistern diggers broke in 30 years later, they reported that the air inside was dry and cool, not damp like a drain. Archaeologists who entered in 1995 noted that the mortar between the bricks contained ash from coal fires, a fuel not widely used in Lyon until the 1840s, at least a decade after the supposed construction date. That coal ash is worth examining. Lyon in the 1820s burned wood and charcoal. Coal arrived by barge from Saint-Étienne after the opening of the first railway line in 1832, but it was expensive and used only in industrial boilers, not in domestic or municipal brickwork. The ash found in the Fishbones is fine-grained, with a specific chemical signature of anthracite from the Loire coalfields. That signature appears in Lyon's industrial record starting in 1842. So the mortar, which means the ceiling walls, contains coal ash. But the bricks behind the walls, the original tunnel bricks, contain no coal ash. They are made from local clay fired with wood. That means the original tunnel construction predates the coal era, while the ceiling walls were built after it. The two phases are separated by at least 20 years. What happened in those 20 years? The 1840s were a time of political upheaval, of secret societies, of revolutionary plotting. Could the tunnels have been used for something that required a rapid, organized sealing when the political winds changed? No explanation was ever given. No explanation was ever given for the scale of the thing. 32 tunnels, each 10 meters long, means 320 meters of underground passage carved into solid limestone. That's nearly 3 football fields of excavation. In the early 19th century, without power tools, that labor would have required a team of at least 50 men working for a year. The spoil, the broken rock, has never been found. No tailings piles on the hill. No records of cartage contracts. No rubble dumped into the Saône. The rock simply vanished. Let's do the math. Each tunnel is roughly 2 meters wide by 2 meters high, but vaulted, so the cross-section is about 3.5 square meters. Multiply by 10 meters of length gives 35 cubic meters per tunnel. Times 32 tunnels gives 1,120 cubic meters of limestone removed. That is the volume of a large house. Limestone weighs about 2.5 tons per cubic meter. The total removed rock is 2,800 tons. To move that much rock by horse and cart, you would need over 400 wagon loads. Each load would leave tracks, would need to be recorded in city gate tolls, would be noticed by neighbors. No trace exists. The only plausible explanation is that the rock was used elsewhere on site, but there is no building above ground made of that stone. The limestone of the Fishbones is a specific pale beige with fine fossil fragments of ammonites. No building on the Croix-Rousse matches that stone. It went somewhere else, or it never left the hill at all. If it never left, then the tunnels are not the excavation. They are the empty space left behind after something was removed. But what? Perhaps the chamber below was originally filled with something, stored goods, machinery, even soil, and the tunnels were access passages that were later cleared. That would explain the missing rock. The rock never left because it was never removed in the first place. The tunnels were carved into existing void space? That defies geology. One alternative is that the rock was used to make lime for mortar, burned in temporary kilns on the hill. But producing 2,800 tons of lime would require an enormous fuel supply and would leave distinctive kill remains. No such remains have ever been found. Another alternative is that the rock was crushed and used as aggregate for concrete. But concrete was not widely used in Lyon until the 1850s, after the tunnels were already built. But here's what makes that claim impossible. The tunnel walls show chisel marks consistent with professional quarrymen, not municipal drain layers. The cuts are clean, evenly spaced, suggesting a single skilled team working from a master plan. Yet the city archives contain no work orders for any underground project on the Croix-Rousse between 1800 and 1862. The National Railway Archives, the Military Engineering Corps, the church property records, nothing. The tunnels appear in history only at the moment of rediscovery, and then they were sealed again. The chisel marks themselves tell a story that contradicts the drainage theory. Drainage channels are roughed out quickly, the goal is function, not finish. But these walls have a consistent tool pattern, a four-toothed chisel called a bouchard, used by stonecutters who worked on cathedrals and public monuments. Each stroke is about 3 centimeters long, overlapping in regular rows. That level of finish is unnecessary for a hidden drain. It is the mark of craftsmen who took pride in their work, or who were following precise instructions. And there is another detail. In 3 of the tunnels, the chisel marks stop abruptly at a certain height, then resume with a different tool. That suggests the work was interrupted, then restarted later by a different team. The break is at the same level in all 3 tunnels, about 1.6 meters above the floor. That might correspond to a change in the project's management or funding. No document records that change, but the consistency of the break height suggests a planned pause, perhaps to allow for the installation of something at floor level, racks, platforms, or containers, before the upper walls were finished. The tool that resumes the work has a narrower tooth spacing, indicating a finer finish. That is the opposite of what you would expect from a rushed drain project. The later team was making the wall smoother, not rougher. The brick walls themselves tell a contradictory story. They are not rough emergency ceilings. Each wall is carefully laid, 3 bricks thick, with a small iron ring set into the center brick. The rings are identical across all 32 tunnels. They were cast in the same foundry. That foundry operated in Lyon between 1847 and 1855, so the walls went up in that 8-year window. But the bricks behind the walls, the original tunnel bricks, contain clay from a brickyard that closed in 1823. That means the tunnels were built before 1823, then used for at least 2 decades, then walled off between 1847 and 1855. The timeline doesn't add up. What were the iron rings for? They are set into the center brick, flush with the wall surface, with a diameter of 12 centimeters. That is too small for a handhold or a mooring point, too large for a simple hook. One theory is that they held wooden beams or metal bars, something that was attached to the wall, then removed before the final sealing. But there are no corresponding holes in the floor or ceiling, so whatever was attached was freestanding or hung from the rings themselves. The rings show wear on their inner surfaces, polished by rope or chain friction. That means something was repeatedly tied to them and then untied. Not a permanent installation. A temporary use, repeated many times. And the wear is identical on all 32 rings. Whatever happened in those tunnels, it happened in every one of them, the same way, many times. Imagine walking into each tunnel, tying a rope or chain to that ring, doing something at the far end, then untying and moving to the next tunnel. That pattern suggests a repetitive industrial or logistical process, not the random activity of a drainage system. A metallurgical analysis of the rings in 2010 showed they contain trace amounts of zinc, which was not commonly added to iron until the 1840s. That matches the foundry window. But the original tunnel bricks contain no zinc, so the rings are not original to the tunnels. They were added when the ceiling walls were built. That means the ceiling walls were not just barriers, they were fixtures. They were designed to have rings. The rings were part of the ceiling, not part of the earlier use. They didn't just seal it, they erased it. In 1862, after the cistern workers reported their discovery, the city engineer ordered the tunnels rebricked within a week. The order was verbal. No written directive survives. The workers were paid in cash from a discretionary fund that the city council later refused to audit. When a local newspaper asked about the tunnels in 1863, the mayor's office replied that the passages were old mine workings and posed a collapse risk. But there are no mines under the Croix-Rousse. The only mineral extraction in Lyon was river gravel. The reply was a lie. Why would a mayor lie about something so easily disproven? Because the lie worked. No one in 1863 had access to the geological records that we have today. The public accepted old mines as a plausible explanation. But the mayor's office went further. They ordered all references to the tunnels removed from the city's annual infrastructure report. The report for 1862 originally included a 2-page note about the discovery. That note was cut out. The binding shows clean knife cuts. The remaining pages were renumbered by hand. The person who did that work had access to the bound volume after it had been submitted to the council. That means someone high in the city administration, not a low-level clerk. The identity of that person has never been established. But the act itself speaks volumes. If the tunnels were truly just old drains, why go to such lengths to excise them from the official record? A simple note saying 19th century water channels, now sealed, would have been unremarkable. Instead, someone chose to erase them entirely, and the evidence tells a different story. In 1987, a team from the University of Lyon lowered a fiber optic camera through a crack in one of the brick walls. The footage shows that the sealed end is not the true end. The tunnel continues beyond the wall for at least another 4 meters, then turns sharply downward. That downward shaft is not brick-lined. It is cut directly into the limestone, and the camera could not see the bottom. Ground-penetrating radar in 1995 revealed that the 32 tunnels all connect to a single large chamber about 15 meters below the hill's surface. The chamber is roughly rectangular, 20 meters by 15 meters, with a ceiling height of over 4 meters. No official excavation has ever been permitted. Let's think about that chamber. 15 meters below the surface is deep enough to be below the water table in wet seasons, yet the 1987 team reported that the air was dry. That suggests the chamber is not just a hole in the rock, it is sealed against water infiltration, perhaps lined with waterproof mortar or clay. A 20 by 15 meter rectangle with a 4-meter ceiling gives a volume of 1,200 cubic meters. That is larger than the nave of a small church. What would require that much underground space, accessible through 32 separate tunnels, each with its own sealed door? A storage depot? A refuge? A workshop? A meeting hall? The radar data shows no internal columns or supports, which means the chamber is either naturally stable or was engineered to hold its roof without pillars. The limestone at that depth is strong, but a flat ceiling 15 meters wide would require careful engineering to avoid collapse. The Roman aqueduct, by comparison, used arches and piers. The Fishbones chamber does not. Its ceiling appears to be flat, according to the radar reflection. That is unusual. Most underground chambers of that era are vaulted. A flat ceiling is harder to build. It suggests a very specific purpose, perhaps one that required a clear floor without obstacles. Maybe a theater? A warehouse for large crates? A hidden factory where looms or presses were operated. The flat ceiling would allow for uniform height across the entire space, making it easier to stack goods or move equipment. In 2013, a second radar survey with higher resolution detected faint linear anomalies on the chamber floor, parallel grooves about 60 centimeters apart. Those could be tracks for wheeled carts. If so, the chamber was designed for transport, not just storage. The grooves align with the tunnel entrances, suggesting a logical flow of goods or people from the tunnels into the chamber. Current status: the tunnels are still there. The entrance that the cistern workers found was sealed with concrete in 1912 during construction of a reservoir. But 3 other access points exist: blocked manholes in basement floors of private buildings on Rue des Capucines. Property owners have reported hearing low-frequency vibrations at night, like machinery running far below. The city has never investigated. You cannot go inside. The only public images are the 1987 camera footage and a few blurred photographs taken by an urban explorer in 2003, who described the brick walls as too perfect, like they were meant to be seen from this side. What could cause low-frequency vibrations 15 meters underground? The obvious answer is water flow or geological settling. But Lyon is not seismically active, and the water table under Croix-Rousse is stable. The vibrations are described as rhythmic, not random, a low hum that repeats every few seconds. Some residents have tried to record the sound, but consumer audio equipment cannot capture frequencies below 20 Hz. The city's own seismic sensors, maintained by the Natural Hazards Observatory, show no anomalies in the area. Either the vibrations are not real, or they are being dampened or filtered by something between the source and the surface. A sealed chamber filled with air could act as a resonator, amplifying certain frequencies while blocking others. If there is machinery running in that chamber, it would have to be powered. There are no electrical lines going into the hill that are not accounted for in city records. But the records only go back to 1900. Anything installed before that would be off the books. Could there be a 19th century water wheel or a steam engine still operating down there? The coal ash in the mortar suggests coal was used in the tunnels at some point. A hidden steam engine would explain the need for ventilation, for iron rings to secure belts or chains, and for the rhythmic vibrations. But a steam engine that has been running for over a century without maintenance is impossible, so the vibrations must have another source, or they are misreported. One resident, a retired acoustic engineer, recorded the hum using a professional geophone in 2019. He found a fundamental frequency of 8 Hz, with harmonics at 16 and 24 Hz. 8 Hz is the resonant frequency of the human chest cavity. That is not a coincidence. Whatever is generating the hum is tuned to a frequency that can be felt, not just heard. That is a common feature of heavy industrial machinery, but also of large ventilation fans. If there is a fan running, It would explain the dry air inside the chamber. The fan would be circulating air from somewhere. But where is the air coming from? Modern investigations have been blocked at every turn. In 2016, a historian at the Municipal Archives filed a formal request to examine the 1862 verbal order. The archive director denied access, citing fragile documents. The historian later discovered that the relevant logbook for 1862, the one that would have recorded the engineer's order, is missing. Not damaged. Not in restoration. Missing. The pages were cut out with a sharp blade. The cut marks match a knife found in the archive's own conservation lab, but no employee was ever charged. That knife is a curious detail. It is a standard archival bone folder, used to crease paper, but the blade on this one had been sharpened to a razor edge, which is not normal for a bone folder. The knife was found in a drawer that was supposed to be locked. The drawer's lock showed no signs of forced entry. Only 3 people had keys: the archive director, the deputy director, and the conservation lab supervisor. All 3 denied any knowledge of the missing logbook. The police investigation, such as it was, consisted of 2 interviews. No forensic examination of the knife was conducted. The case was closed after 3 weeks. The logbook has never reappeared. What was in those missing pages? Not just the verbal order, but likely the names of the workers, the source of the discretionary fund, and any correspondence with the mayor's office. Removing those pages was not an act of casual vandalism. It was a targeted destruction of evidence. What the official explanation still fails to answer is simple. If these were just drains, why 32? Why the precise alignment that matches nothing on the surface? Why the iron rings, the foundry mark from 1847, and the clay from 1823 in the same wall? Why did the city pay cash from an unaccounted fund? Why cut pages from the logbook a century and a half later? And why does the ground-penetrating radar show a large chamber that no one has ever entered, directly beneath one of Lyon's busiest neighborhoods? Consider the alternative explanations that have been proposed over the years. Some say the tunnels were a secret military storehouse, built during the Napoleonic Wars to hide weapons from the occupying Austrian forces after 1815. But Napoleon fell in 1815, and the tunnels were built before 1823. Lyon was not occupied after 1815 in a way that would require hidden armories. Others suggest a religious purpose, that the tunnels were built by a secret society, perhaps the Freemasons, who had a strong presence in Lyon. The city was a center of esoteric thought in the 19th century, home to alchemists and mystics. But the Freemasons kept detailed records of their lodge buildings. No lodge owned land under Croix-Rousse. A third theory points to the silk industry itself. The Canuts were known for their radical politics and their network of hidden passages. Could the Fishbones have been a hidden factory or storage area for looms? The problem is that silk weaving requires light and ventilation, neither of which exists underground. You cannot weave silk in darkness, so that theory fails. A fourth theory, less discussed, is that the tunnels were an early attempt at underground transport, a horse-drawn railway or a funicular system to move goods from the river to the plateau. The constant slope and the iron rings could have been used for a rope-hauled system, but there is no record of any such railway, and the tunnels are too narrow for a standard wagon. A fifth theory, which emerged from a 2008 conference on industrial archaeology, suggests the tunnels were a testing ground for early pneumatic tube systems, the kind used to send messages and small packages in Victorian offices. The iron rings could have supported leather seals or guide wheels. But pneumatic tubes in the 1840s were experimental, and no known inventor worked in Lyon. The pattern connects to other sealed sites. Beneath Seattle, the underground city was buried after the fire of 1889. Beneath Edinburgh, the vaults were sealed in the 1790s after disappearances. Beneath Paris, the catacombs hold 6 million skeletons, but there are also sealed passages that the official maps do not show. In Portland, Oregon, the so-called Shanghai tunnels run beneath Old Town, allegedly used for kidnapping sailors. In London, the Kingsway Exchange tunnels were kept secret for decades, only revealed in the 1990s. What all these places share is a moment when the authorities chose to bury a problem rather than explain it. Lyon's Fishbones are no different. 32 tunnels, 32 brick walls, and a chamber that no one is allowed to see. But there is one more connection that is rarely mentioned. In 1848, the year after the foundry that made the iron rings began operation, revolution swept across Europe. Lyon was a center of the uprising. Barricades blocked the streets. The National Guard shelled the Croix-Rousse from the hills above. Hundreds died. The government declared martial law. In the chaos that followed, many buildings were searched, many documents were destroyed. Could the Fishbones have been a hiding place for revolutionary arms or supplies? That would explain the need for a large chamber accessible by many tunnels, a distribution hub. And it would explain why the city government in 1862, just 14 years after the revolution, would want to bury any evidence of rebel activity. The official story of drains would be a cover for a political secret. But if that is the case, why the elaborate brick walls with iron rings? Why not just rubble? And why does the radar show a downward shaft that continues beyond the chamber? No, the revolutionary theory does not fit all the evidence. The downward shaft suggests a deeper level, perhaps a well or a second chamber. The radar data from 1995 hints at a void beneath the known chamber, but the signal attenuates before a clear shape can be resolved. That deeper space has never been investigated. The network of tunnels is still there. The city has declared them unstable and dangerous, yet no structural study has ever been published. You cannot go inside. The reason for the seal is not a mystery of engineering or hydrology. It is a mystery of intention. Someone built that chamber, used the tunnels for decades, then walled them off and erased all records. Below street level, the Lyon you know is not the only one.